There we go. Welcome, everybody. As I mentioned last week, we're not counting the weeks of the Chabura anymore, but we are celebrating the 1 year anniversary since we began. So June is going to be quite a packed schedule. We've added a few additional shiurim to commemorate our 1 year anniversary. And Be'ezrat Hashem, we begin July, our new membership curriculum that I'm sure most of you have already signed up for. We're very, very excited to kick that off with the first shiur of the new curriculum kicking off July 5th with Rabbi Dweck live in London, but of course it will be streamed to all members and then available as a recording. You'll get all the information nearer the time. If you haven't joined yet, I don't know what you're thinking. Go on thechabura.com/join. Any questions or queries, please do reach out. We're very honored to have not only a very, very special guest, Rav Yoni Rosensweig here tonight, but we've also got the Rosh Bet Midrash to do an intro for the Rav. So Rabbi Dweck, b'chavod.
Thank you, Rabsina. And good evening, everyone. I want to welcome Rabbi Rosensweig. I'm going to speak to you his biography, but I have some words that I like to say, as introduction to him. When I heard that he had agreed to give a shiur to the Chabura, I was overjoyed, genuinely. I was really, really happy. I am happy and grateful that he's doing it because of the great kavod that I have for the Rav. The Rav is a rabbi of Netzach Menashe community in Bet Shemesh. He's a renowned teacher of Halakha, Gemara, and Jewish thought. From 2006 to 2009, he served as the Rosh Kolel of the Mizrahi community in Melbourne, Australia. When he came back, he headed Yeshivat HaMiftar and became Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshivat Shvut Yisrael in Efrat. And he held that post until 2016. Currently, he teaches at Midreshet Lindenbaum. Rav Yoni has smicha from Rav Nachum Eliezer Rabinovich, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, and from the Chief Rabbinate of Israel, and degrees in education, philosophy, and history. He's the author of Yishrei Lev, a 3-volume response on different halachic questions, and of Conversations in Essence, in which he engages in imaginary dialogue with great Jewish thinkers from the past. And finally, he'll soon publish a book on mental health and halakha, which is the subject of tonight's shiur. So clearly the biography speaks volumes about the Rav for itself, but it doesn't do the Rav justice. To me, the Rav is one of the most courageous hachamim that I know in contemporary times. The answers to the questions that he gives, the questions that he fields, that he addresses, and the openness that he has to listen to the questions of people today is staggering. Whether it's through his Facebook page or his email or his writings, he is readily available. He makes himself available to the contemporary, everyday questions that are unique to our time, that have not been dealt with by almost anyone previous. And he has dedicated himself to being able to teach and to use of his great knowledge to make sure that the average members of Klal Yisrael who seek his wisdom will be able to live lives of Torah and mitzvot wholly and completely in our time. And just before we came on, before all of you were let into the room, he mentioned to Sina, please tell them my email address so that if anybody has any questions that they need to ask regarding halachot that are contemporary, especially with regards to the subject of tonight's shiur, tell them, Rav Sina, my email address. So Rav Sina will make sure to tell them. I would be very reticent to do that, but again, that shows the courage of the Rav and his absolute dedication to making sure in the best way that he can that Klal Yisrael can live by a Torah that is alive and a framework for action and living. Tonight's subject is mental health and halakha. And as I'm sure you will see by the subjects or the issues that he touches on tonight, that there is a vast amount of issues, situations, questions revolving what it is that we know now and how it is that we relate today about mental health that he is immersed in and addressing regularly with tremendous expertise. He of course doesn't need me to say that, but as a respected admirer and follower of his, I can say that is certainly how I find it. And so, without further ado, I want to turn it over to the Rav to be able to present his shiur tonight. I ask mechila from the Rav. I will not be able to stay for the whole thing, but I certainly will listen to it on the recording afterwards. And with that, for the Rav, bechavot.
Thank you so much. I deserve those accolades, but I really do appreciate them. And potrin b'chvat achsani, as they say, I'm very happy to be here, and thank you for inviting me. It's really, I see it. I mean, it's a pleasure for me. First of all, I like Rabbi Dweck, and I like Sina. So like personally, I'm happy to be here. But besides the personal, I also see it as a form of shlichut. That to be able to raise awareness to the issues of mental health. For me, it's very important to reach across, space to communities far and wide and be able to share this information. I don't mean to pat myself on the back. Okay, that's not the goal of this. But the reason it's so important for me to do is because I really feel like very few people are doing it. I mean, in other words, there are many, many great rabbis, Baruch Hashem, many really important scholarly and insanely individuals, but many of them, not through any malice, simply because they're not familiar with the topic, do not answer questions of mental health, or simply don't know how to answer questions of mental health. Once again, by no fault of their own. We're not taught in yeshiva how to do so. The topic is not discussed, and there's very few material that's out on it. And indeed, 4 years ago, when I began to get a few more questions from my own community, I realized this fact, which is what led me to start learning with a friend of mine, a psychiatrist, Dr. Shmuel Harris, about this thing that Rabbi Dweck book. Everything that I wrote in the book was obviously peer-reviewed, first of all, written together with a professional, but also peer-reviewed by other professionals as well, peer-reviewed by I took it, made the rounds to many, many great poskim, halachic deciders, to make sure. But all that was done. Why? I did all that because that I realized that it hasn't been done yet, and that it needs to be done. And what I want to talk to you about is why it needs to be done, and the difficulties of doing it, and what that teaches us about mental health, and a little bit about also what it teaches us in terms of what we could do for mental health in our own communities. So that's the framework of it. The discussion will be, to some extent, surrounding Halakha, because that is my, so to speak, my expertise, or the thing that I set out to do was to deal with Halachic questions pertaining to mental health. But as you'll see, it's not a technical endeavor. This is not something that is merely just answering a few questions that people have. I realized along the line that this is much bigger than that, much bigger. And so we'll see all of that. That was all by way of introduction, and now I'll get straight to the point. When I first spoke to Sim about doing this, he asked what I should call it, and I said we should, the difficulties of writing a book on mental health. Why are there such difficulties about writing a book on mental health? So let me explain. I always, when I started asking questions, right? I said I got it peer reviewed, right? So when I started going up to professionals, dietitians, social workers, psychologists, psychiatrists, and I asked them a question referring to mental health, right? I always got the same answer. And the answer that I got was, every case is different. So I joke a lot of times that, suppose I should have, why did I even write a book? I just printed out one page, written, every case is different, and, photocopied it and sent it out. And if there are professionals here on the call, I don't know if there are on this Zoom session, but if there are professionals here, they'll tell you the same thing, right? If you ask someone, well, there's a guy who's suffering from depression, he wants to listen to music on Shabbat, should I allow that as a rabbi, would you allow that person, right? If I ask that of a professional, like, what do you think? Do you think I should let him? The professional would tell me, you have not given me enough information for me to be able to tell you. You think that telling me that someone from depression is enough? Then you don't understand mental health. Because depression comes in many forms. because I need to know the history, because I need to know comorbidity, because I need to know manifests itself. I need to know if there's any suicidal ideation. I need to know if there are suicidal attempts that have been in the past, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There are many issues that be figured out and understood prior to an evaluation of the situation. And just as that's true for the professional, it's true for the rabbi. So therefore, here's the dilemma, right, that I understood right from the beginning. On the one hand, I wanted to write a book about Jewish law. Jewish law loves definitions. It needs definitions. In order to tackle any issue, you really need to define what you're talking about first, and define in what cases you would allow, what cases you wouldn't allow, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right? That sort of thing. Okay. Someone is a choleshe yesh bo sakana, someone who's in danger. Choleshe ein bo sakana, someone who's sick but not in danger. Someone who's not sick at all, and is just unwell a little bit, feeling a bit, If we take an example from physical health, right? If a woman is giving birth, is in labor, we look at that as a dangerous situation where her life is in danger. So obviously we would violate Shabbat completely and absolutely in order to get her to a hospital and whatever else she needs. If a person is sick in bed with a low fever, right, then he would probably be a choleh she'ein bo sakana, someone who's sick but not in danger. And if a person wakes up in the morning, a bit of a background headache, right, he's not well. So he's not sick, he's a bit unwell, right? Who of us hasn't sometimes been unwell, let's say on a fast day? Did you break the fast because of that? Well, I'm assuming you didn't. You're feeling unwell, just go to bed, lie down, etc. You didn't drink, you didn't eat, you didn't break the fast. You kept going, until the end. And okay, so you felt a bit under the weather. You weren't sick. You certainly weren't dying, So obviously these different things, right? With health, many times we know how to define. Okay, what about the guy who's suffering from depression or OCD or PTSD or DID? I don't know if you know all these things, but I'll open some of the acronyms later. Yeah, but what about someone who suffers from these things? How do we define them? Most rabbis would be stymied by the questions. They wouldn't know what to do with themselves, and not their fault. Once again, they were never taught, and we just don't know. And like I said, even within the mental health world, right? Just using the buzzwords is not enough. You need a full history, full understanding, to be able to rule on a certain issue. That was the problem with writing the book. In order to write the book, I needed to create a new language. The language that I created was one that didn't discuss rules, like, as principles, so much as it described cases. So I described cases and ruled on them according to the best medical knowledge that was at my disposal. And at the footnotes, I explained the ruling and how I got to it. And that was meant to give you kind of like an idea of how I looked at it, and how I saw it and what I utilized in order to get to the conclusion, and possibly to help to copy to another case in the future or to adapt to another case in the future using those principles. But the best way to do that is by looking at cases, by seeing cases. That's the best way. And you know what? That's part of the problem. In other words, part of the problem that we have as a society is that we're not exposed enough to these cases. Many times people who are suffering from poor mental health are hospitalized, meaning they're taken away from the public, and they're put away in some place. Justifiably, non-justifiably, it doesn't really matter. We don't usually see the people who are, and excuse the colloquial term, crazy, around us. We don't see them. They're taken away, they're put aside. And if they do live among us, they don't tell us. That's what's called the stigma. People are afraid. If someone has cancer, chas v'shalom, but they tell everybody. They tell people. They tell people all the time. No, they're willing to share it, et cetera, et cetera. And people come and they offer support and they offer, tip. And when someone is suffering from anxiety, do they share it? Many times they don't. Many times they are afraid of how society will react or not react. They're afraid of what people think about them. And so they keep it a secret. And mostly, a lot of times, they're ashamed of themselves for no reason. It's not their fault. But people feel ashamed. They feel like this is my fault. Somehow, I could not get a grip on myself. I mean, it's all up here. I should be able to do something about this. I can't do anything if the evil cancer took a hold of my body. But I could have done something to stop myself from deteriorating into a state of depression. That's what it will. It's not true. A lot of times it's not true. It's not your fault. And you couldn't have done anything. And that person's help needs real help. But society doesn't always believe people that they need help. That's the problem. And once again, I'm here on this call. Usually, anyone who's listening to me will say to themselves, but I believe it. And I'm sure you do. I'm sure that in theory, absolutely you do. But as a society, we don't. As someone once put it, let's say someone gets up in the morning and he says, I have a fever. He calls into work and he says, I have a fever. I guess they'll tell him not to come in. What if in the morning he says, I'm feeling depressed? Will the employer tell him not to come in also? Same thing? I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure the employer even understands what I'm feeling depressed means. We understand fever. We don't understand depressed. We don't really get it. We've all heard the buzzwords. We've all heard the terms. Really get it. And that's where the stigma comes from. And that's why people feel like they're not really being listened to, not really being heard. That's where the problem starts. My work on halakha and mental health, amongst other things, is meant to help break the stigma. So once again, I said at the beginning, it's not just about a specific answer to a specific question. No, it helps break the stigma. How? How does it help break the stigma? Let me give an example, okay? And in a moment, I'll give a few more examples. Example number one, I mentioned before, music for someone who's feeling depressed, right? So what is this person asking me to do? To violate Shabbat in order to help with his depression. Now, if someone with a fever, once again, who couldn't get out of bed, comes to me and says to me, can I take a pill, or can I do this, or can I do that in order to help me get better, right? I would say yes. When I say yes, that he can violate, what that means to him is, wow, you really believe me. You believe me so much that you're willing to violate Shabbat on a mission, let's say, in order to help me, in order for me to be able to do what I need to do to get better. You really think I'm sick, don't you? You've accepted my view of reality as I have presented it to you. Okay, that. Thank you. That's what that person will feel. But if someone says, I need music, and we say, well, come on, do you really need it? I mean, you can't last 25 hours without music. What's going to happen to you? What's going to happen? Kill yourself, chas v'shalom? No, right? You're not going to kill yourself. Okay. So what's going to happen to you? Well, you'll feel a little bit bad. I mean, I don't want you to feel bad. This is important, So, with all due respect, I'm not sure we can allow you to violate Shabbat in that way, just to feel a little bit inside. That's the problem. That people think that that's what's happening over here. This is about feeling a little bit better inside. And therefore, how can we allow this? It's impossible to allow, or how could we know for sure, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What message does that person get at that moment? The message that they get is, the rabbi didn't believe me, or doesn't think it's so bad, or doesn't understand how much I'm suffering. That's the message that person, it enhances the stigma. I want you to know that halakha it's a double-edged sword. It has the ability to be an immense help to people who are suffering from mental health concerns. Time has the ability to be an absolute hindrance, because it could reinforce the stigma, it could enhance the stigma if used wrongly, and create a lot of bitterness towards Judaism and halakha. Or the other option is that is a great help to a person, because Judaism is a very, when used properly, it's an amazing system, an anchor, really, an anchor and like a very, like, I'm sorry for all this noise, a very stable, it's a very stable ground for people who are searching for something, and therefore it could be and like a an island of stability if we use it properly, and if not, then unfortunately, as I said, it harms individuals. So we need to make sure that we're using it right. Okay, that's the point. Now, why is it that people have trouble? I've spoken to many poskim. Why is it that people have trouble to give heter and to give leniencies? The answer that they give usually is, we don't know. We just don't know whether the person is just a little bit blue, a little bit down. It's really serious. Yeah. How do we know which one it is? How do we know that the person is really unwell? So they claim ignorance. And I've heard this so many times. Just lately, okay, I was talking to a young woman. Her parents had abused her when she was a child. She's not in touch with her parents. Her friends can't put up with her. They kicked her out. She's been diagnosed with anxiety and depression and eating disorder and PTSD. She lives alone. She receives some social security. She works a little bit. She is very difficult. After speaking with her for hours, I can tell you that, she doesn't understand social cues a lot of times. She doesn't understand social boundaries, right? I offered her to call me whenever she needs. She's used that offer. She calls me all the time, and she spends, like, if she could, she'd spend hours on the phone with me. I have to tell her that I have to get off, right? I let her speak up to an hour, but not more than that. I met her like a week and a half ago. I've spent like 5-6 hours with her on the phone. And it's been very time consuming. But I'm looking at this girl, right? She like I said, she has anorexia. She has PTSD. She has anxiety and depression. She doesn't have any friends or family. She lives alone. And honestly, between you and me, I don't know if I'm going to hear from her for much longer. I told her she has to, it's terrible that she lives alone. I mean, a person like that, right, who's always feeling dejected and alone and pushed aside, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Honestly, I fear for her life every day. So I don't know, what I can do for her, but I do know that when she told me that she asked a rabbi, a different rabbi, before she met me a week and a half ago, she has another rabbi that she's been in touch for years, whether she can be on her phone on Shabbat to help her get through Shabbat, because, she tries to keep Shabbat, but then she's alone all Shabbat, and it just like tears her apart and cause a deterioration, etc. That he basically told me afterwards on the phone, the rabbi, that he doesn't know how to define her halachically. That's the problem. Is that people say, oh, we don't know how to define halachically. We don't know. We raise our hands, and we simply can't take responsibility. Why can't we take responsibility? We need to take responsibility. I told that girl, under no uncertain terms, that she must use her phone on Shabbat. She can use her phone on Shabbat if she needs to watch something, to listen to music, whatever it is, to keep herself busy, because her thoughts can be very damaging to her. And here's what people don't understand. I'm just explaining a little bit about mental health, a little that I understand. And once again, this is just some things that I have learned from people who are, see, the rabbi doesn't get it. And the simple person also doesn't always get it, right? We don't always understand. I understand the problem. We don't always understand. When we have, I don't know, someone has cancer and they have to take chemotherapy, right? It's like we get it, right? We're not geniuses in like biology and medicine, but we get it. It's like there's like the cells and we need to kill the bad cells. So therefore we use the chemotherapy to kill. Oh, I get it, yeah. So like that's what a person figures, right? That's That's what's going on, and that's how it is. So we understand why the antidote fits the disease. But when someone says, I'm depressed, and he says, I need to listen to music, a regular person will say, I don't get it. I don't understand. What are you talking about? What's the connection between A and B? You're depressed, so listening to music is going to solve your problem. How exactly? I'm confused as a rabbi on why you want me to allow this, right? Someone with borderline personality disorder wants to journal on Shabbat, to write down things, to journal on Shabbat. That will help them deal with their BPD. Why? Once again, what's even the connection between these two things? What's the difference between writing things in a diary and your borderline personality disorder? Are you trying to tell me that writing is going to heal that? I don't get it. I had a guy with trichotillomania. Trichotillomania, for those of you who do not know, fancy way of saying hair pulling disorder. People who pull hairs all the time. Now, I'm going to tell you the question he asked me, okay? And I'm telling you, you won't even be able to understand why he asked me the question until I explain it. This individual with trichotillomania asked me whether it's okay that he chews gum on the fast days. Now, right, you don't understand the connection? 100%. That's how it is that the connections are, to some extent, very, very out of the blue. They're not evident in and of themselves. What could someone with trichotillomania want to ask me? He wants to know whether he can chew gum on a fast day. What does that do for the person? Let me answer every one of these questions for you, okay? So that you'll understand a little bit more. So a person who is suffering from depression. See, the problem with depression is that the person is living here in his head. If you've ever suffered from depression, and I have not, if you've ever suffered from depression, then you must know what I mean. See, the problem with depression is that people don't feel sad. Many times they don't feel at all. They have become so dejected and so depressed about life that nothing has any meaning anymore. It's not like things have meaning and the meaning is sad. That there is no meaning. There's only apathy. There's nothing. That's the problem. So they live here. And because they're in their heads all the time, they think really bad things. They say to themselves, what's the point of living anymore? What's the point of just sitting around here all day long? You know, no one even comes to visit me. Why should I even continue living? No one comes to visit me. I'm of no value. In fact, I'm a burden. I'm really a burden. I don't even go to work. Whenever people come, they're like pitying me. I mean, like, they'd be better off without me. They really would be better off without me. Now that I think about it. Actually, I'd be doing them a favor. I mean, they're really the only thing that I can do of value at this point is to take my own life. Let's be honest. You know, it's really no point. What am I doing? It's been months since I've gone out. You know, I don't do anything. It's pointless. This is pointless. I really don't see the point. I'm just gonna end it. Right? What happens? That person has convinced themselves that that's the right way to go. And you know what can help them? Listening to music. Why? Will listening to music make their problems go away? No. But it will make them not think about their problems. It'll help them not live in their head. It'll help them stop chugging and grinding through the same issues again and again and again. Them leave that place. And it'll take them hopefully one step away from doing something terrible many times. We don't take into account that the depression is a deterioration over time. People don't become suicidal in one shot. They deteriorate. We need to take that into account. That's part of it. So we need to get people out of here, out of the place where they torture themselves, out of the place where they suffer so much, place which causes them so much strife. That's what we need to pull them out of. Journaling is the same thing for someone with borderline personality disorder. Same idea. They need to be doing something else. And sometimes journaling is what helps. Now, whether that's okay or not okay to do, it's a Torah prohibition, et cetera, it's a long story. Not simple at all. But my point is that we need to have a better understanding of the human mind and the human psyche, as rabbis, at least, also as people, in order to be able to evaluate and understand the situation that is being presented to us. Or else, of course, you'll say, I don't know. I'm not sure. You need to learn and to be sure, because this is people's lives we're talking about. And the person with trichotillomania, he had a problem. Hair pulling disorder. It's like a tick. He was pulling. He had a beard. He would pull and pull and pull. You might say, what's the big deal with hair pulling disorder? Pulls out his hair. Like, what's the big deal? Big deal. Big deal. I had a girl, side story. I had a girl who sent me an email with pictures of her head. She had bald spots all over. And she sent it to me because she wanted to tell me that she can't go out with friends, to work, without a hat, ruined her life. Her hair pulling disorder literally ruined her life. So when you think, oh, like, what's the big deal? Big deal. And this fellow, he would pull at his beard. So his beard would look absolutely ridiculous if he continued to do it. And once again, he would be very embarrassed in public, in front of people. He couldn't go out of the house either. What did he find out? He found out that chewing gum helped him to avoid that. He found out that when he was doing something else, like chewing gum, that it helped him to control his urge to pull at his beard, to pull out the hairs. But he found that on a fast he had a real issue with it. So he wanted to know whether he could chew gum on the fast day to help him with dealing with the disorder. There was no way that I would have made that connection without that. Every person's different and every case is different. And we need to be, sensitive to that. And people are suffering a lot in ways that we could not imagine even. There was a young woman who contacted me with DID, Dissociative Identities. I know it as multiple personalities. That's how people usually call it, and in movies, that's how it's presented. But it's a dissociation. It's a situation where people dissociate. They leave their self and they become another self, in a sense, and they don't remember what the other self does. And this young woman sent me a message crying, really crying. It was really heartbreaking. She would go to sleep, or rather she would black out, and she would wake up the next morning and she would not know what had happened. But her phone had clear evidence of what she had done the previous day, and it wasn't kosher, so to speak. It wasn't within the framework of an Orthodox life. And she was so embarrassed by it. But not just embarrassed, she was heartbroken, She wanted to know how she could do tshuva, how she could repent for the sins that she had committed. We need to understand these conditions in order to be able to answer questions like that, to have the right empathy and sympathy, for the people who go through these things. For that, we need a little bit of, like I said, training and a lot of heart. It's so hard sometimes. And this is another thing. The reason that people with mental conditions hide their conditions is because, and I don't know how to put this, I'll put it bluntly, they're difficult to deal with, right? Once again, I'm comparing it to cancer, okay, just for the sake of comparison, just so you all understand. If someone is lying in a hospital, God forbid, okay, and they're dying from cancer, which is terrible, I'm not belittling it, okay? But many times you can come to the person, you can sit by their bedside, and you can have a proper conversation. And you can say something, and they can say something. They can understand you, you can understand them. And you can say how much you mean to them, how much they mean to you, and they can say how much you mean to them. You can have a nice goodbye and, right, meaningful moments. When a person is suffering from dementia and they're shouting at you the same word every single day, all the time, and they can't get out what they want to say, and they're getting on your nerves like you won't believe, it's not as comfortable to sit next to that person. It's just not the same. It's difficult, and people find it hard to have empathy and sympathy in those situations. Those people are annoying. They're a lot to handle. That young woman that I mentioned before, who, like I said, calls me all the time now. Yeah, very, very time consuming. Absolutely. And it's a struggle on a midos level, right? On a character level. To be like Hillel Zaken. You remember that story with Hillel Zaken? That the guy comes to him Erev Shabbos, to test his patience again and again. He comes at the most inconvenient time, right? This young woman, I can already tell, because she's done it twice already. She's going to call me every Erev Shabbos at the most inconvenient time. Yeah, and why? Because she freaks out before Shabbat. Because she'll be alone on Shabbat. Because she can't talk to anybody. She can't call anybody. That's when she freaks out the most. Erev Shabbos. And what's she going to eat? How's she going to make food for herself? She can't use the microwave. She can't use the oven, etc., etc., etc. So what does she do? So 5:30 Erev Shabbos, she calls me up. I'm in the middle of showering, getting ready for Shabbos, putting the dishes away, setting up the table. That's when she calls me. Now she wants to talk for an hour. Okay, that's what I did. We spoke for an hour each time. But, like mashallah says, right? You could get angry at her. You can get mad. You can get annoyed. She has no respect for boundaries, no understanding, etc. Or maybe she does, but she just can't help it, whatever it is. You have to find a lot of heart to help people like that. A lot of patience. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be comfortable to talk to those people. It's not going to be simple. But that's what we can do. And now I'm not talking just about me. I'm talking about you as well as a community. People don't entrust us with their secrets about this issue because they're afraid of how they'll react. And you know what? I think they're right a little bit. I think a lot of us don't have the patience. I think a lot of us would be like, I don't have the hours and hours and hours to spend with you now, even though you're a friend. I have other things to do. I have a degree that I'm learning for. I have a job to go to. I have a family. 100%. I'm not saying we have to sacrifice our entire lives for these individuals. But if we could show an ounce more of compassion than we do, I think it would go a long way. I think that if people understand that we're welcoming, people see around them that people welcome conversations with them, even though it's hard, even though it's difficult. Yes, then that's something that we can do. And I think that my work on Halakha mental health does that very same thing. I'm circling back to the beginning, full circle. Meaning, I think it does the very same thing. It engages those people and it tells them, I have you. There is an answer for you within Judaism. There is an answer for you within Orthodoxy. There is an address that you can come to. It's not you're alone. No, we care about you. And we want to see what we can do. We want to see how we can help. Sina, I can continue talking, or I can open up for questions. What do you think is best?
I mean, I'm happy for you to do either, because that's very. I don't know where to start. I've had a few conversations during COVID period actually with friends who have struggled. I myself get very anxious when the kids are ill. But one thing I've noticed from a couple of friends of mine who don't actually live in the UK, they're not necessarily practicing, but they feel like one of them is actually about to shiva, and the mental health issues that he's going through has led to him having to not practice, for example, on Shabbat as he would like to practice. And because there haven't been rabbis out there to explain that it's okay when you're suicidal to have these challenges, it's not the ideal, fine, but there are these challenges, and you are still a practicing Orthodox Jew, he feels like he's going off the derech. So what you're saying fits in exactly with how I've experienced it with these two specific individuals. One of them who's actually wants to be part of the Berit, but feels like if I'm having these problems and I can't overcome them as a result of suicidal thoughts, I'm not a proper Jew. So I'm not part of Orthodoxy. And that's why I think the voice that we're hearing is such an important voice. So I guess that was more of a feedback than a question, but I would love to open up to some of the audience to see what they're saying. Anybody got any questions, please? Feel free to unmute and dig right in. While you think of your questions, I've actually got a question, Rav. I know, I think it was Masachet Ketubot. It's related more to the questions related to mental health more generally. And I think it's Rav Shimon Ben Gamliel, who says that idleness leads to, I think it was Shimaon. How are we to understand Shimaon? It's a mental state, is that right?
There's a machloket about those terms, right? So you're talking about, like shi'amum, right? There's a shi'amum in one place and a shi'amon in one place. But yes, generally, like mostly what people describe that as is either some form of well, it's either depression. The shi'amum is either depression, according to those who, or it's some sort of I'm blanking out on the word, but it's some sort of psychotic state. That's what I wanted to say. It's some sort of a psychotic state. It's one or the other. It's not so clear what that term is. In the book, I have actually one of the appendices is to go through all the terms that appear in the Gemara.
That was my next question. Do you have a list of the terms that we have now associated with mental health issues?
I do have like a list of the terms of the Gemara and what they might mean.
Fantastic.
If you want, I'm happy to send that to you, by the way.
I'm getting the book either way, so I'm happy to wait till I get the book. Any questions? Anybody else?
Yeah.
Philip, go ahead.
Please.
To what extent is, I guess, learning a little bit more about mental health something which regular, I guess, community rabbis can do, and how much is it always going to be something which lies beyond, lies beyond their ability to really get to the bottom of? Meaning, if they have a halachic question which comes up about someone who's suffering from serious depression, whether they could do something on Shabbat or whatever it is, they'll always have to consult an expert or someone who's really spent years of their life dedicated to it. So to what extent is it something which rabbis would really spend, I don't know, months, whatever it is, finding out more about, and how much is it just being aware to know what to ask to the expert?
Very good. First of all, I think it's a great question. First of all, I'll say I think that I'm actually in the process beyond the book of creating hopefully like a center that is meant to deal with Halakha and mental health, or Judaism mental health and beyond. B'ezrat Hashem, there's a lot of plans there. We need to raise some money, but we'll get there too. But part of the plans there is also to train rabbis. So train rabbis about mental health, train mental health professionals about Halakha, to kind of like have the two worlds meet and to generate greater awareness of the issues and the things. But I will say this, okay? To answer specifically your question, 2 points. Point number one, I think rabbis, in a relatively short amount of time, now that I've done it over a relatively long amount of time, I think that I'm able to train rabbis over a relatively short amount of time about how to generally understand the topic and be able, if not to paskin, to know how to get to a place where they paskin, on the issue. And I'll explain what that means in a second. So that's number one. Number two, I think that a great, and once again, I want to say something. Before I say this criticism, I want to say something. I love rabbis, okay? They're my people. I think they're great people. And I think generally, I know some of them make mistakes, and we know all the bad stories, so of course there are bad apples in the bunch, without a doubt. But most rabbis that I know want to help. They just want to help. They're civil servants in a sense. They put themselves out there, and they're good people. But even though they're good people, and many times they can make mistakes and be misguided, and this is one of those fields where I feel like rabbis simply paskin and rule on things they have no understanding of. And I am very disappointed when that happens. And I come across it once in a while, of rabbis who just, they give psakim to people, they give rulings. Instead of saying, I don't know, Instead of saying, I'll look around, I'll search, I'll ask someone, etc. They give a wrong sack. Believe me, if the least that I could do is to, and I'll put this bluntly, is to shut some rabbis up, that would be a good thing. Yeah? If the least that I could do is to get rabbis to understand that they don't have an earthly idea of what's going on, that's great. Even if I don't train even one rabbi, but I do train them to say, I don't know, that would be wonderful, because that already would possibly make a lot of lives better. So I do think that we need to train rabbis, and I do think that, if you ask me what I do, right, I definitely need to get a very good understanding of a person's history and what's going on with that person. If hearing them is not enough, I need to contact the mental health professional that they're dealing with, the psychiatrist or psychologist that they're seeing, to hear from them and to hear what's going on. And at times that's definitely necessary, but you need to get a full picture. I can tell you that as a rabbi, right, people ask me questions about Shabbos and Kashrut and this and Shomer Negiah and this and that. I can answer those questions, minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, easy. Any mental health question that I get takes me, I would say minimum 20 minutes, sometimes more, half an hour, sometimes even more than half an hour, every single question, because for that you just need so much information to get it right. And by now I know the right questions to ask and how to do it, et cetera, but that took a lot of work and a lot of effort. And I really hope that we're able to train rabbis to understand these things better. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your talk. It was very insightful and informative. I really appreciated it. I wanted to ask you a question about, and you don't have to answer, it's a little bit too in-depth, but sort of about the methodology which you approach these questions, because you drew the connection between mental health and physical health. Certainly there's a lot of connection there. It's a lot of interplay, but they are different in one fundamental important factor, in my opinion, and that affects the way in which it's possible to discuss these things within a halakhic framework. If you go to the doctor and you are in pain, that doctor can run tests and achieve some sort of objective understanding of what's going on in your body. So the pain you feel is psychosymptomatic, but the underlying cause of the pain is, so as a Rav, you can look at that and say, oh, the person is in X amount of pain, but we know what their issue is, so we can discuss that and understand if that qualifies for certain leniencies, or the halakha would allow them to do certain things in certain cases. Mental health is fundamentally relative. It's not only impossible, it's fundamentally subjective and relative. So even like the Dsm-5 is descriptive of the field's understanding of a subject. It's not a prescriptive diagnostic tool. And even the own person, if a person says I'm depressed, or I'm the most depressed I've ever been, I feel nothing, we only know that relative to their earlier experiences. So we don't know if that person's actually, nobody knows that person's actually dangerous themselves if they haven't been a danger before, or if they're just going through a rough patch. So how do you deal with that kind of inherent relativity and inherent subjectivity in this issue?
Absolutely. Once again, a very important question, and absolutely correct in so many ways. So let me like some of the things you said. 100%, the field is, and the therapists themselves, of course, know it. The field is very subjective. Two therapists will many times not agree about any one given diagnosis. And many times, as you say, they don't even follow the DSM per se. Like if you ask someone who's been in the field for a long time, how do you diagnose depression? They usually don't tick 5 out of 9, like the DSM tells you to do. They see the person, they talk to them, they know depression. I know depression, I see it, yeah. I don't need to tick the boxes to know it, yeah. And same thing for OCD and for all these things. People just know it from their experience, and that's how they kind of like decide what it is. Although, once again, two therapists and their experiences may be different. And of course, that's also very much reflected in the fact that the difference between Dsm-1 and Dsm-5 is so significant, and the change that has gone through in so few years relatively, in terms of the field. I mean, wow, to have like so many differences.
Even in school now, we're being taught that Dsm-5 is not a necessarily one-for-one tool in the field.
Sure, 100%. And that's even without going into the fact that we all know, I mean, anyone who's in the business knows that the DSM is also a reflection of a bit of politics, a bit of that, so let's not even go into that and the insurance companies and all those stuff. But let me give an example of that, if you will, of what you're saying. Let's say probably the most contentious thing that I wrote in the book, okay, has to do with the trans community. I only have one question that was asked that had to do with the trans community, and that was whether you could, wear clothing of the other sex, whether you could do the surgery, take the hormones, et cetera, to look, like another gender, et cetera. So I'm not going to go into the actual answer, because there were rabbis who said one thing and rabbis who said another. But in a long footnote that I write there, I write basically what you just said. In other words, I write that there's a discussion amongst the professionals whether it will even help. In other words, before I come as a rabbi to be matir or aser, right, to allow or to disallow, right, the question of whether transitioning will help the person get over their problems or not help the person get over their problems, make it worse or make it better, is in and of itself a very contentious issue. And therefore, I, as a rabbi, right, when I look for the medical knowledge on the issue, will come under like a barrage of opinions. And people will say, why are you telling him to do the surgery? I say, I want to help him. He's suicidal. You think that will stop him being suicidal? If he transitions, he'll be more suicidal. How do you know? Oh, it's just in this study. And so they say, no, that study's garbage. That study proved that it's all great. Yeah. And then, no, that study is ridiculous, et cetera, et cetera. You know this. I mean, I assume people know a little bit about what I'm talking about. Anyway, that shows the problem, okay, which Gidon, I can see her name is Gidon, which Gidon, put forward. What's the solution? The solution, in terms of my own methodology, is that, first of all, sometimes there are open questions, but in most questions, okay, the solution is, because I labored on this. I had this question for many months, and I thought about it a lot, and I tried to figure out how I'm going to tackle the elusive nature of this topic. And the answer was that Halakha has categories for that too. So Halakha has categories for pikuach nefesh and cholesh yesh bo and cholesh en bo sakana. Sure, it also has a category called safek pikuach nefesh. It also has a category called safek cholesh en bo sakana. So in other words, the Halakha does also talk about cases which are iffy and tells you how to treat them. So, for example, I do have a lot of iffy cases, and I developed, once again, through talking with mental health professionals, a list of criteria to which I could define something as enough of a doubt that the person might be in significant physical danger, right? So, for example, I use percentages, meaning what percentage is it that in that having that specific disorder that a person will take their own lives, et cetera, et cetera. What kind of suicidal ideation we're talking about, these sorts of things. So I tried to create a list of basic ideas of how we can judge a case as a safek, enough that we'll say, look, I don't know what's going on here, but I don't need to know. It's enough that I have a doubt. And I'm going to say, violate Shabbat. It's enough that I have a doubt that I'm going to say, even if it's a Torah prohibition, don't worry about it. So I tried to develop those rules as well because of the elusive nature that you're talking about.
Can I ask a follow-up, Sina, or is it?
I'm sorry?
I'm asking if I can ask a follow-up.
Oh,
Go ahead.
sure. I don't know I don't know how much time we have, but yeah.
That's what I was
Yeah, I
asking
think-
Sina. I was asking Sina.
Rav, we have you until another 4 minutes, I think. We don't want to take more of your time because I believe it's 11:30 p.m. there.
Right.
So get on if
Okay,
you want to
ask
follow
a
up, and then we'll ask a few more. We'll see who else is around for 3 more questions.
Awesome. Okay.
2 more minutes.
So I was just wondering if you give, if you rank in order of priority the practices that are used. So do you rank what the field considers to be evidence-based practices higher than those that are emerging practices, higher than those that are, let's say, more speculative practices, or do you treat all, because nothing is truly evidence-based in the same way you would see with the physical sciences, does that halachically mean that even something that's called an evidence-based practice would be considered the same as a speculative or emerging practice?
That was the reason that we're so behind, not just in Judaism, but as a society, in this whole issue, is because the real breakthrough came in DSM-3. because what you're talking about, right, the evidence-based, that sort of thing, right, meaning psychology wanted to be recognized for years and years and years as a legitimate branch, and with DSMs-1 and 2, it was impossible because everything there was psychodynamic and Freudian and this and that, and therefore DSM-3 basically broke the mold and came and said, you know what, we're going to treat this, like a checklist. We're going to treat this just like physical health in a sense. We're going to give you like clear guidelines, clear things, and we'll say, oh, 1, 2, 3, 4, that's this. Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4. We're not going to say why it happened because of the father running out and the mother and the this. Forget all that stuff. Yeah, we're just going to talk about symptoms. And the second we talked about symptoms, suddenly it became like, oh, you know what? We actually have something we can work with over here. Yeah, so it's all good. So on some level, Halakha also responded that way, meaning Halakha also was gratified to have this new system. It's not perfect, obviously, because as you understand well, and you said it basically yourself, right? A checklist does not really encapsulate what the person is going through. Yeah, it's not actually correct. That's him. Yeah, is like some lines in a book, because it's not him, but it has helped Halakha in a sense as a discipline that enjoys looking at lists and clear guidelines and clear definitions to form an opinion on these issues and to understand what they are. So the answer to your question in short is, yes, we would look differently at things that are evidence-based and things that are more technical in nature than about speculative notions that are hard to be proven one way or another. It's difficult for me to take, Freudian or neo-Freudian, ideas and translate them into some practical halachic guideline. It's very difficult to do that.
Thank you, Rav. One final question before the Rav goes. Anybody?
Rav, thank you so much for everything. So is the main mechanic for Chilul that you're using for permitting things tethered to the possible devolving of the patient for suicidal ideation, or is there other categories in Halakha that you're using to permit things?
No, it's not just suicidal ideation. No, that's just an example of pikuach nefesh, of chole sheyesh bo sakanar pikuach nefesh. But with other things, it's about functional consequences. Okay, I once again, the chapter maybe is chapter 2 in my book is the chapter that I spent the most time on because it took the longest to figure out these definitions that you're all asking about, which are great questions, by the way. It just took me so long. I'm kind of like giving it to you like in 2 minutes, but I don't want you to, like in the book, it's like there's like pages and pages of footnotes where I explain how I got to these things. So I don't want you to think it's like I'm pulling it out of a hat. But it's definitely something that took a long time to put together and to understand how you make this up, how you form it. It's the other part of this is functional consequences. So functional consequences means, right, what does it matter, and putting this in short, what does it matter if I can't get out of bed because I have 40 degrees fever or because I'm depressed? What does it matter? I can't get out of bed. Does it really matter what the reason is? Now, some people will say, what do you mean? If it's just depression, just get out of bed. But he can't. That's the point. He can't. He can't, just like the person with a fever can't. That's really how it is. Like really. Like you have to believe this person. We have to believe him. I know that with the other guy, you don't have to believe him. You just put your hand on his forehead and you know that he's sick. I get it. So you can't see the depression. I understand. But we need to get used to believing people that they really are sick, that they really are unwell, and that they are deserving of our sympathy and empathy, that they are really deserving of it. And it's not just a trick and nothing else. No, we have to start believing people. And I know some people will take advantage of that and blah, blah, blah. So what? So some people will take advantage of it, as if people don't take advantage of the physical healthcare system. They also do sometimes. So what? We have to help people. We have to help people who are suffering mentally as well. And the first step to that is the person has functional consequences. He hasn't gone to work for a week because of that. He hasn't gone out to shop for a few days because of that. The person has agoraphobia. Okay? He's afraid to go outside. Doesn't want to be seen with people. afraid he'll get stuck. He won't be able to get away if a fire starts, things like that, et cetera, et cetera. We have to believe that that's true. You can see the functional consequences. The person has trichotillomania. Their life is ruined. Is a person like that not sick, at least as a cholesh ein bo sakana? They have trichotillomania. I understand. Hair pulling doesn't seem like it's life-threatening or a sickness. It has functional consequences, significant functional consequences for that person. Really, he's not sick? I think he's sick. I'll tell you one last thing, okay? If Sin allows me to say one last thing.
We can be here all night, Rav. It's the timing for you that I'm worried about.
One last thing. I don't want to keep full. One last thing. My Rebbe, Rav Nachum Eliezer Rabinovich, Oshiva Maladumin, passed away a bit more than a year ago. I miss him every day, more than words can tell you. He was such a great man. Such a great man. And I used to ask him shilohs all the time. And many times he would say, not just to me, but to others as well, he would say, what do you think? He wouldn't just answer, he would say, what do you think? We would say what we thought, etc. But he always thought. And many times I would say to him, here's my svara. Here's what I think. Do you think that's a good svara? Do you think that's appropriate? And he would say to us, yes, that's very good. Right? And the mistake would be to think that he agreed. That did not mean he agreed with you. It meant that he was supportive of you, right? He wanted to support. So he would say, oh, very nice, very nice. But if I asked him, do you think that that svara is correct? He would say, no, I have to look at it. I can't commit, but he would be very supportive of his students. He would say to us, it's okay. I don't have to sign off on it. Like, you're a rabbi too, so you can also sign off on it, and that's okay. And, we always want the backing of greater rabbis than we. We always want that. And we're always looking for that, and rightfully so. I think it's important to get the wisdom and the intelligence of people who are out there, and we should do that all the time. I'm a very big fan, don't get me wrong. But when my Rebbe passed away, I realized that it wasn't as shocking for me because he prepared me for it. In other words, what he had told me when he was alive was, you can paskin. You don't need me. Now, I always felt that I needed him, but he was giving me the other message. He was saying to me, you don't need me. You're going to be okay. You're going to be okay without me. Even when I'm gone, it'll be fine. You can paskin, you can decide. And I understand all the questions that I was asked here tonight, and they're all correct, meaning the doubts, and how do you define, and how are you going to know for sure, and all this stuff. I get it. But if there's one thing that I learned from my Rebbe, was that we all need to step up and take responsibility. And we need to, to put it colloquially, you got to be a man. You got to just you got to get up there and do what you need to do. We can always wring our hands and say we don't know for sure and this and this and that. And while we're doing that, people are suffering. So I'm not saying you should paskin from a hat, just like pull something out of a sleeve. Of course, you should do so with erudition and knowledge, and give answers that are correct. But we got to step up and take responsibility for the people that are around us and the people that are suffering. And we might make mistakes. Sure, we might make mistakes sometimes. Sure. And will we always know where the line is drawn? We won't always know. That is not going to stop us from doing the things that matter. So, have a good night.
Thank you so much for that, Ron.
Thank you so much.
It's the embodiment of a Torah rooted in reality and a Torah rooted in life. So thank you for being that embodiment, and we look forward to hosting you in the future, and we look forward to reading your book. I'm going to put in the chat, as well as on the WhatsApp groups, your email address and your Facebook group where you deal with the questions that you receive for all of us to learn from. So thank you so much again on behalf of everybody here. You always have a home here to come and spread this important Torah, and we look forward to having you again. Thank you, Rav, for all that you do.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank
Good night,
you.
everybody.
Good night.
Thank you.